the Night Court ASMR. Hello, darling, and welcome to the Night Court. As always, it's your choice, and you have chosen an end of day meditation appropriate for dusk, when the book of day is closing. Dusk invites us to reflect on accomplishments, feel gratitude, and be kind to ourselves so we can rest well and begin again refreshed the next day. So, I'm going to do a bit of reading and a few triggers. I just want to see how they sound. I have this necklace with this completely absurd medallion that I got at a thrift store a while ago in Amsterdam, and I like how it sounds because it's quite pretty too, but outrageous. But all the texture gives it some nice sounds. I have a stack of books here. We'll see how we do. I have Seneca on the shortness of life. We do a lot of Seneca on this channel, and you can see I do a fair bit myself, given all of the bookmarks. That sounds kind of interesting, doesn't it? So, I've also got a book I mentioned in the last video, or I don't know the order I'll be putting these out in, but a recent video by Anthony de Mello. It's called Awareness. And I say it's by him, really. It's a series of lectures he did that were transposed, or transcribed, excuse me. I'm not talking about music. Transcribed. Now, interestingly, Anthony de Mello was a Jesuit priest. I read the back of it. He was a Jesuit priest known throughout the world for his writings and spiritual conferences. He died suddenly in 1987. I think that no matter what your particular views are about religion, and I'm not here to discuss mine, but the things he says are quite secular, and so widely applicable in the same way that a lot of the Stoics might talk about spiritualism, or depending on the word you're listening for, God. In my view, those things don't really change the utility. Whether or not you believe in them don't really change the utility of the philosophies therein. And the same is true of Mr. DeMello. These are not evangelizing conferences. They're not talking about scripture. He just has a lot of really good straightforward talk, good things to say, and in a voice that's very, I think, contemporary, very casual, which is why occasionally it sounds like a person speaking out loud off the cuff, because it is. It's not sort of prepared text, it's not narrative, it's just him talking. So we'll read some sections of that maybe. But before we begin, take a moment to prepare yourself and your space to attend the night court. As always, ensure that you are undisturbed and unrequired to do anything but listen, engage, and enjoy for the duration of the experience. Because this session is designed to induce blissful, deep relaxation and meditation. You should not listen while driving, operating machinery, or otherwise completing a task that requires your careful attention. Now, if you haven't already, darling, turn down the lights. Sit or lie back in a comfortable position, or get comfortable at your desk. I know sometimes that's when we're listening to this. Ensure your legs, back, and neck are supported. Notice how your attention to these things immediately helps to create a sense of ease. As your shoulders relax and your jaw unclenches, perhaps your eyes close, your ears open, attuned to each small sound, perhaps already visualizing the dark star-flecked sky overhead, the glow of a city on the horizon, the cool mountain wind whispering, and the dark embrace of the night. Before I start reading, I'm quite thirsty, and I'm going to open this lemonade and see how it sounds. I was hoping for more of a pop sound, a hissing sound. It does have a nice glug glug. I really like when my videos that I listen to start with some triggers, but have a lot of whispers or soft-spoken moments. I have this little, not steamer, but it's like it's meant to hydrate your face throughout the day, like maybe if you want to put a toner in it or something, but I like how it looks. You see? Looks like a fog machine or something. This isn't a spooky video. I'm gonna mist myself. I also had a trip to the beach somewhat recently and got some pretty rocks. And I love how they sound. Some of them are very sparkly. I don't know if you can actually see the the sparkles. Yeah. It's a relaxing thing to look at, and some are quite smooth. As a child, I was always collecting rocks, so they were precious stones. Some of them quite ordinary. But look at these sparkles. Perhaps even then, and probably so as a child, I already knew that things gave me tingles. Let's see what Seneca has to say. The great thing about this book too is that it has the writing is like embossed, would you say? Or depressed, in fact. Maybe it's imprinted into the cover and creates a nice texture. I think embossed is the word I want. Seneca on the shortness of life. Life is long if you know how to use it. Look at those whose good fortune people gather to see. They are choked by their own blessings. How many find their riches a burden? How many burst a blood vessel by their eloquence and their daily striving to show off their talents? How many are pale from constant pleasures? How many are left no freedom by the crowd of clients surrounding them? In a word, run through them all, from lowest to highest. One calls for legal assistance, another comes to help, one is on trial, another defends him, another gives a judgment. No one makes his claim to himself, but each is exploited for another's sake. Ask about those whose names are learned by heart, and you will see that they have these distinguishing marks. X cultivates Y, and Y cultivates Z. No one bothers about himself. Again, certain people reveal the most stupid indignation. They complain about the pride of their superiors because they did not have time to give them an audience when they wanted one. But can anyone dare to complain about another's pride when he himself never has time for himself? Yet whoever you are, the great man has sometimes gazed upon you, even if his look was patronizing. He has bent his ears to your words. He has let you walk beside him, but you never deign to look at yourself or listen to yourself. So, you have no reason to claim credit from anyone for those attentions, since you showed them not because you wanted someone else's company, but because you could not bear your own. We have to make ourselves people we want to spend time with before criticizing others, right? lucky if we don't mind spending time in our own minds. We should be so lucky. For what new pleasures can he at any hour now bring him? He has tried everything and enjoyed everything to repletion. For the rest, fortune can dispose as she likes. His life is now secure. Nothing can be taken from his life, and you can only add to it, as if giving to a man who is already full and satisfied food which he does not want but can hold. So you must not think a man has lived long because he has white hair and wrinkles. He has not lived long, just existed long. Age is no indicator of maturity, certainly none of wisdom. That's me speaking, but I think that's part of what he's saying. So many people can live forever and learn nothing. For suppose you should think that a man had had a long voyage who had been caught in a raging storm as he left harbour, and carried hither and thither, and driven round and round in a circle by the rage of opposing winds. He did not have a long voyage, just a long tossing about. Okay. I know I've read you the quote that this title is from, "Life is long if you know how to use it," in another video, though it does bear repeating. There are households of the noblest intellects. Choose the one into which you wish to be adopted, and you will inherit not only their name, but their property too. Nor will this property need to be guarded meanly or grudgingly. The more it is shared out, the greater it will become. These will offer you a path to immortality and raise you to a point from which no one is cast down. This is the only way to prolong mortality, even to convert it into immortality. Honors, monuments, whatever. The ambitious, if ordered by decrees or raised in public buildings, are soon destroyed. There is nothing that the passage of time does not demolish and remove. Ain't it the truth? But it cannot damage the works which philosophy has consecrated. No age will wipe them out. No age diminish them. The next and every following age will only increase the veneration for them, since envy operates on what is at hand, but we can more openly admire things from a distance. So, the life of the philosopher extends widely. He is not confined by the same boundary as our others. He alone is free from the laws that limit the human race, and all ages serve him as though he were a god. Some time has passed, he grasps it in his recollection. There is present. Time is present, he uses it. Time is present, he uses it. Time is to come, he anticipates it. This combination of all times into one gives him a long life. It's not about monuments, material things. I'm hopping around. Let's see. Well, I think I might do this whole page. But life is very short and anxious for those who forget the past, neglect the present, and fear the future. Do you hear that? Life is very short and anxious for those who forget the past, neglect the present, and fear the future. What a shame to neglect the present, isn't it? When they come to the end of it, the poor wretches realize too late that that for all this time they've been preoccupied in doing nothing. And the fact that they sometimes invoke death is no proof that their lives seem long. Their own folly afflicts them with restless emotions, which hurl themselves upon the very things they fear. They often long for death because they fear it. Nor is this a proof that they are living for a long time, that the day often seems long to them, or that they complain that the hours pass slowly until the time fixed for dinner arrives. For as soon as their preoccupations fail them, they are restless, with nothing to do, not knowing how to dispose of their leisure or make the time pass. I think we've probably all experienced this in modern society too. Like it's so easy never to be bored and therefore never have to contemplate your own present, right? And at the same time, be bored. Get bored very fast, right? Like if you have no ability to sort of just sit and experience a moment, then you're always looking for the next thing to do. Like whether it's watch a show or scroll on your phone or listen to a podcast or whatever. It just makes me think how I personally often want to consume content. And usually I do so with the thought of growing, learning, being productive in some way. But it's a fine line to start feeling uncomfortable when there is, quote, nothing to do. We have to be careful. Back to the book. And so they are anxious for something else to do. And all the intervening time is wearisome. Really, is it just as when a gladiatorial show has been announced? Or they are looking forward to the appointed time of some other exhibition or amusement? They want to leap over the days in between. This is just so fascinating to read something that's so ancient that he's literally talking about gladiatorial shows, It's not a metaphor. And yet we're still struggling with the same things. We talk a lot in modern society about, well, and I do think the exponentiation of certain types of technology has made it so that we never have to sit with our own thoughts. And we can always be moving on to the next thing. But whether or not you consider that this is easier to do nowadays, the problem has always remained across humanity, right? Like these are age-old problems. I just think that's fascinating. Humans have always been the same. So they're looking forward to the appointed time of some other exhibition or amusement. They want to leap over the days in between. Any deferment of the longed-for event is tedious to them, yet the time of the actual enjoyment is short and swift, and made much shorter through their own fault. For they dash from one pleasure to another and cannot stay steady in one desire, seeking pleasure, avoiding displeasure. Their days are not long, but odious. On the other hand, how short do the nights seem which they spend drinking or sleeping with harlots. Hence the lunacy of the poets, who encourage human frailty by their stories in which Jupiter, seduced by the pleasures of love-making, is seen to double the length of the night. What else is it but to inflame our vices when they quote the gods to endorse them? Now, I'm not issuing any decree about my feelings on how one should spend the night, or lovemaking, or stories about Jupiter, and so forth. And I'm not saying that overall I believe in constant deprivation or austerity. Although, the Stoics, of course, temperance is one of the four: wisdom, temperance, justice, courage. The best ideas about how to live life, right? But I think what he's saying is that when we overly invest in such pleasures as are naturally and necessarily fleeting, when we invest our feelings about the future, about what there is to be optimistic about, we're on dangerous ground. What else is it to inflame our vices when they quote the gods to endorse them, and as a precedent for our failings they offer and excuse the wantonness of the gods? Can the nights, which they purchase so dearly, not seem much too short to these people? They lose the day in waiting for the night, and the night in fearing the dawn. I mean, you can't deny. I'm sure we've all fallen prey to this kind of thinking where maybe it's even more simple or even more less salacious. Like you're looking forward to a trip or a vacation or something, or maybe seeing a show or a movie, and you look forward to this event and you plan for it, and then you engage. Maybe it's in debauchery at a party, I don't know, or maybe it's just in seeing the film or watching a play you're excited about. And then afterward, it feels like you invested all of your energy into waiting for it and preparing for it and not being present in the moment until you arrived to the thing you were looking forward to, and then it's just sort of done in a blip. They lose the day in waiting for the night, and the night in fearing the dawn. That's quite a good passage. Even their pleasures are made uneasy and anxious by various fears, and at the very height of their rejoicing, the worrying thought steals over them. How long will this last? This feeling has caused kings to bewail their power, and they were not so much delighted by the greatness of their fortune as terrified by the thought of its inevitable end. You know, it's not just kings to whom this applies, even just like your average modern day, I think people in anything that's not the super rich demographic or the super powerful demographic, like there are little pleasures we can all look forward to far too much, or get something and just start to be afraid of losing it. And that's why, I think the richer one becomes, the more you see that fear of losing the wealth. And that is a dangerous and imprisoning cycle of thoughts to be in. Ooh. Not so much delighted by the greatness of their fortune as terrified by the thought of its inevitable end. When the most arrogant king of Persia, was Xerxes, was deploying his army over vast plains and could not number it but had to measure it, he wept because in 100 years, out of that huge army, not a soul would be alive. But he who was weeping was the very man who would bring their fate upon them, and would destroy some on the sea, some on the land, some in battle, some in flight, and in a very short time would wipe out all those for whose 100th year he was afraid. And what of the fact that even their joys are uneasy? The reason is that they are not based on firm causes, but they are agitated as groundlessly as they arise. But what kind of times can those be, do you think, which they themselves admit are wretched, since even the joys by which they are exalted and raised above humanity are pretty corrupt? All the greatest blessings create anxiety, and fortune is never less to be trusted than when it is fairest. All the greatest blessings create anxiety, and fortune is never less to be trusted than when it is fairest. That's one to remember. To preserve prosperity, we need other prosperity, and to support the prayers which have turned out well, we have to make other prayers. It's all an unending cycle. Whatever comes our way by chance is unsteady, and the higher it rises, the more liable it is to fall. I think a little bit of how you hear these stories of people winning the lottery. And I read some stat at some point, it's the vast majority of them have nothing in a couple of years, like people who win millions. Even Moving ahead. No man is despised by another unless he is first despised by himself. An abject and debased mind is susceptible to such insult, but if a man stirs himself to face the worst of disasters and defeats the evils which overwhelm others, then he wears those very sorrows like a sacred badge. For we are naturally disposed to admire more than anything else the man who shows fortitude in adversity. That's so true. And yet most of us are trying to avoid adversity, but we can't help but most of the time recognize that that's part of what makes somebody a better person, a more worthwhile person. In my studies, I suppose, it must indeed be better to keep my theme firmly in view and speak to this, while allowing the theme to suggest my words and so dictate the course of an unstudied style of speech. Where is the need, I ask, to compose something to last for ages? The irony of that, right? That I'm reading it so many years later. Why not stop trying to prevent posterity being silent about you? You were born to die, and a silent funeral is less bothersome. So, if you must fill your time, write something in a simple style for your own use, and not for publication. Less toil is needed if you study only for the day. Again, when my mind is lifted up by the greatness of its thoughts, it becomes ambitious for words, and longs to match its higher inspiration with its language, and so produces a style that conforms to the impressiveness of the subject matter. This is a bit funny to me, in trying to create something for the sake of posterity and in thinking too much about when it will be read later and sort of bolstering oneself up by considering how profound one's thoughts are in the moment and, writing in this impressive way. That's not the stuff usually that lasts, is it? So he's saying, don't bother with that. Just be authentic. Then it is that I forget my rule and principle of restraint, and I am carried too far aloft by a voice no longer my own. To cut the matter short, this weakness in my good intentions pursues me in every sphere. I fear that I am gradually getting worse, or, which is more worrying, that I am hanging on an edge like someone always on the point of falling, and that perhaps there is more wrong than I myself can see. For we take too intimate a view of our own characteristics, and bias always affects our judgment. I imagine many people could have achieved wisdom if they had not imagined that they had already achieved it. If they had not dissembled about some of their own characteristics and turned a blind eye to others. Wow, I imagine many people could have achieved wisdom if they had not imagined that they had already achieved it. It's so true when you think about people you really like and respect. It's never the ones who think that they've figured it all out, because that doesn't exist. And to believe one has wisdom, sometimes that means that you don't keep learning and seeking to grow because you think you're already there. So you achieve the opposite end. So much here. Let's move on and read some Anthony de Mello. On wanting happiness. I was saying that we don't want to be happy. We want other things, or let's put it more accurately. We don't want to be unconditionally happy. I'm ready to be happy provided I have this and that and the other thing. But this is really to say to our friend or to our God or to anyone, you are my happiness. If I don't get you, I refuse to be happy. It's so important to understand that. We cannot imagine being happy without those conditions. That's pretty accurate. We cannot conceive of being happy without them. We've been taught to place our happiness in them. So that's the first thing we need to do if we want to come awake. He often talks about what it is to come awake, right? And the series of lectures is called Awareness. So it's all of a piece with that. I love what he's getting at here, though, because I am so guilty of it, too. Like, I hope no one watching this or listening, or if you're still stuck with me and you're not asleep, hopefully you're asleep. But I hope no one thinks that in my sort of talking out loud to you about these topics that I believe I've achieved all of these things. In fact, I read so much of it because I know I haven't. And they're good reminders, but back to the point at hand. This idea that we don't want to be happy because we're always making our happiness contingent upon something else, whether it's achieving something or having something. Like, I will be happy when I have my mate, or when I publish a book, or like when I get this job. We're setting conditions on our own happiness instead of just pausing and realizing that we can just be happy, and happiness can exist in a state separate from getting that car that we want. Like, I've thought about this a lot in some of I try to use some of these meditation apps, and I'm not great at meditating either, but I'm working on it. And this is a thought I keep coming back to. It has been reiterated for me when I listen to some of this content. And it's that you actually only need to recognize in any given moment that you can and are happy and at peace. And all it takes to do that is to pause and recognize that you need nothing to feel happy and at peace. It's just to exist from moment to moment. That's not to say it's always possible to sort of like just stop what you're doing and only live from instant to instant. There's a past, there's a present, there are things for which we need to plan. But we're actually setting ourselves up for sadness, unhappiness, whatever, when we place so many conditions. So most people, and this is kind of what he's saying, it's like we don't actually want to be happy. We just want the thing that we've made a condition of our happiness. I just think that's so useful, and every time I come back to this text, I reread this passage, because I think, like, we've all done it. I know I've done it. Like, when I achieve this, when I have all my ducks in a row, then I'll be happy, then I'll be satisfied. But we keep moving the goalposts. Back to Anthony de Mello. So that's the first thing we need to do if we want to come awake, which is the same thing as saying if we want to love, if we want freedom, if we want joy and peace. In that sense, spirituality is the most practical thing in the whole wide world. I challenge anyone to think of anything more practical than spirituality as I have defined it. Not piety, not devotion, not religion, not worship, but spirituality. And I love these types of clarifications that he makes. Waking up. That's his definition. And those things go together, his idea of what it is to be spiritual. Look at the heartache everywhere. Look at the loneliness. Look at the fear, the confusion, the conflict in the hearts of people. Inner conflict, outer conflict. Suppose somebody gave you a way of getting rid of all that. Suppose somebody gave you a way to stop that tremendous drainage of energy, of health, of emotion that comes from those conflicts and confusion. Would you want that? Suppose somebody gave you a way to stop. Would you want that? Suppose somebody showed us a way whereby we could truly love one another and be at peace, be at love. Can you think of anything more practical than that? But instead, you have people thinking that big business is more practical, that politics is more practical, that science is more practical. What's the earthly use of putting a man on the moon when we cannot live on the earth? Also, I feel like I need to mention he's not saying that we shouldn't study or pursue what science illuminates for us. That's not what he's saying. But again, what's the earthly use of putting a man on the moon when we cannot live on Earth? So we have to look at our priorities. A woman once told me that when she was a child, her Jesuit cousin gave a retreat in the Jesuit church in Milwaukee. He opened each conference with the words, "The test of love is sacrifice, and the gauge of love is unselfishness." "That's marvelous," I asked her. "Would you want me to love you at the cost of my happiness?" "Yes," she answered. "Isn't that delightful? Wouldn't that be wonderful?" She would love me at the cost of her happiness, and I would love her at the cost of my happiness. And so you've got two unhappy people, but long live love. Well, I certainly agree with him. That cannot possibly be the definition of love. But I think so many people are operating that way and just not recognizing it. I myself have been through times in my life where I thought sacrifice was the only way to prove love. And that's so wrong. Fear, the root of violence. That's the next chapter. Each section is sort of titled. Some say that there are only two things in the world, God and fear. Love and fear are the only two things. There's only one evil in the world, fear. There's only one good in the world, love. It's sometimes called by other names. It's sometimes called happiness or freedom or peace or joy or God or whatever. But the label doesn't really matter. And there's not a single evil in the world that you cannot trace to fear. Not one. I think I agree with that. Ignorance and fear. Ignorance caused by fear. That's where all the evil comes from. That's where your violence comes from. The person who is truly nonviolent, who is incapable of violence, is the person who is fearless. It's only when you're afraid that you become angry. It's only when you're afraid that you become angry. Think of the last time that you were angry. Have you got it? You've got it in your head. Go ahead. Think of the last time you were angry and search for the fear behind it. What were you afraid of losing? That's where the anger comes from. Think of an angry person, maybe someone you're afraid of. Can you see how frightened he or she is? He is really frightened. She's really frightened, or she wouldn't be angry. There are only two things, love and fear. I've got different themes, but they're all about the same thing. Call it awareness, call it love, call it freedom or awakening or whatever. It really is the same thing. Awareness and contact with reality. To watch everything inside of you and outside. And when there's something happening to you, to see it as if it were happening to someone else. With no comment, no judgment, no attitude, no interference. No attempt to change, only to understand. As you do this, you'll begin to realize that increasingly you are disidentifying with me. Saint Teresa of Avila says that toward the end of her life, God gave her an extraordinary grace. She doesn't use this modern expression, of course, but what it really boils down to is disidentifying from herself. If someone else has cancer and I don't know the person, I'm not all that affected. If I had love and sensitivity, maybe I'd help. But I'm not emotionally affected. If you have an examination to take, I'm not all that affected. I can be quite philosophical about it and say, well, the more you worry about it, the worse it'll get. Why not just take a good break instead of studying? But when it's my turn to have an examination, well, that's something else, isn't it? The reason is that I've identified with me, with my family, my country, my possessions, my body, me. How would it be if God gave me grace not to call these things mine? I'd be detached. I'd be disidentified. That's what it means to lose the self, to deny the self, to die to self. And I don't think we have to look for grace from God. I think one can achieve disidentification in the way that he's talking about in a number of ways. But I'm no guru. Going to have a sip of this, and I'll read a little bit more. This lemonade is fizzy, kind of like kombucha. Kombucha. I have these flowers, and they've been in water for ages, but at some point they stopped drinking the water, and they just became dried flowers, even though there's still water in here. It's so weird. But I love the sound of dried flowers. As you'll know if you've ever watched my channel. Taking a little break from philosophy to listen to flowers and help you fall asleep. Mark Twain put it very nicely when he said, "It was so cold that if the thermometer had been an inch longer, we would have frozen to death." Oh, Mark Twain. We do freeze to death on words. It's not the cold outside that matters, but the thermometer. It's not reality that matters, but what you're saying to yourself about it. I was told a lovely story about a farmer in Finland. When they were drawing up the Russian-Finnish border, the farmer had to decide whether he wanted to be in Russia or Finland. After a long time, he said he wanted to be in Finland, but he didn't want to offend the Russian officials. These came to him and wanted to know why he wanted to be in Finland. The farmer replied, "It has always been my desire to live in Mother Russia. But in my age, I wouldn't be able to survive another Russian winter." Russia and Finland are only words, concepts, but not for human beings, not for crazy human beings. We're almost never looking at reality. These are very Stoic thoughts. I did another video, I think it's Epictetus, who has that quote about basically we don't have fear of the thing itself. The fear comes from the thought that we have about it. I'm paraphrasing. But, this idea that nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Like, of course, there are things that are actually painful, etc. But especially when it comes to what worries us, what ails us psychologically, which, as we all know, can be some of the most painful stuff. It's the thought about the thing, not the thing itself, right? We're almost never looking at reality. A guru was once attempting to explain to a crowd how human beings react to words, feed on words, live on words, rather than on reality. One of the men stood up and protested. He said, "I don't agree that words have all that much effect on us." The guru said, "Sit down, you son of a bitch." The man went livid with rage and said, "You call yourself an enlightened person, a guru, a master, but you ought to be ashamed of yourself." The guru then said, "Pardon me, sir, I got carried away. I really beg your pardon. That was a lapse. I'm sorry." The man finally calmed down. Then the guru said, "It just took a few words to get a whole tempest going within you. And it took just a few words to calm you down, didn't it? Words, 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 words. How imprisoning they are if they're not used properly." And on that thought, I will stop with my words and say goodnight. I hope by now the words are barely distinguishable from the sound of your breathing, the rushing of the blood through your head, and the color behind your eyelids. Because when you close your eyes, it's not just dark, is it? You see all these colors exploding in front of your eyes like fireworks. Let the dark embrace of the night enfold you. The night